This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, which is, for this week, at its cheapest price ever of $11.59 a year. Get access to bonus TLDR content and all of our videos ad-free by signing up to the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal using the link below. For the last 30 years or so, China has been perceived as some sort of economic miracle. Economic reforms, spearheaded by Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s, turbocharged China's GDP, which has averaged nearly 10% growth in the years since. However, despite an impressive performance during COVID, in the last few months, China's economy has started struggling significantly. And on Wednesday, China's premier admitted that China might be looking at a recession. So in this video, we're going to explain the immediate causes behind China's current economic malaise, what might happen next, and how all of this affects the global economy. Just a few days ago, China's premier told his fellow CCP officials that China could be looking at negative growth in the second quarter of 2022. For context, the CCP are currently aiming for 5.5% growth this year, and last year posted growth of 4.8%. But it seems like things are changing, and Li even went as far as suggesting that the economic situation might be worse than it was over the pandemic, noting that unemployment for people between 16 and 24 had reached a historic high of nearly 20%. For context, US unemployment in the same age bracket is about 8%, according to latest data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. Long story short, China's economy is struggling. So why is this? Well, as we see it, there are basically three reasons: the CCP's zero COVID strategy, China's stumbling property sector, and a lack of foreign investment. But let's start with the first reason, China's zero COVID strategy, which is probably the most significant and immediate cause of China's recent slowdown. As you probably know, unlike much of the world, China pursued a zero COVID strategy during the pandemic, which essentially involved imposing exceptionally strict measures to limit the spread of COVID throughout the population, instead of pursuing some sort of herd immunity strategy, which is what many Western countries ended up going for. The strategy ended up being remarkably effective during the pandemic. Mainland China recorded fewer COVID deaths per capita than most other countries. And China's economy performed uniquely well during the pandemic, growing by 10.5% over 2020 and 2021. For context, the US grew by just 2.4% over the same two-year period, while the UK's economy actually shrank by about 2.6%. However, with the mutation of a new, more contagious strain of COVID in the form of Omicron and a mediocre vaccine rollout, China's zero COVID strategy has come under some serious strain. For instance, some 26 million people in Shanghai were locked down at the beginning of April, after the city recorded nearly 30,000 cases in just one day, and restrictions are only now beginning to ease up. Worryingly for the CCP, Beijing is currently experiencing its own spike in cases, and while recorded cases are still well below Shanghai's April numbers, the CCP have already imposed strict quarantine measures, and locals in Beijing are getting increasingly anxious about the prospect of a Shanghai-style lockdown. And obviously, while individuals don't want to be locked down again, lockdowns also aren't good for an economy, especially an economy as export-heavy as China. Anyway, on to the second reason, China's stumbling property sector. As we've detailed in previous videos, China's property market is probably the biggest bubble in the world. Despite a shrinking population, a pre-existing excess of houses, and the highest property prices in the world, Chinese real estate developers just kept on borrowing more money in order to build more homes. And Chinese homeowners kept buying them in the hope they continued to go up in value. Today, this means that about 80% of Chinese household wealth is tied up in property. And Chinese households have taken out massive amounts of debt to be able to finance what are essentially speculative purchases. Anyway, the CCP are clearly aware of this bubble, which is why they've introduced their now infamous 3 red lines in September of last year, which were supposed to discourage developers from taking on unsustainable amounts of debt. Unfortunately, the CCP, though, the reality is that many of these developers just couldn't survive without more borrowing. So, with these restrictions in place, they just started defaulting on their debts. The most famous example of this is Evergrande, but the contagion has been steadily spreading throughout the wider property market, and lots of other developers have also been struggling. And this issue is made worse by the fact that house prices declined by 0.1% in April, the 8th consecutive year-on-year decline. And while that might not sound like much, it's pretty bad news for 2 reasons. Firstly, developers are now worried about profits, so they've stopped building new homes. And that's why land sales from local governments to developers, which fund a lot of local government investment, are down some 70% from last year. Secondly, if prices continue to fall, then buyers might stop seeing housing as a reliable investment, which could burst the property bubble. Anyway, you get the idea. The property sector is struggling in China, and given that real estate accounts for something like 25% of China's GDP, this could really hurt China's headline growth figures. The third reason for China's woes are the fact that foreign investors are fleeing the country. In the last few years, the CCP has developed a bit of a habit for sudden regulatory crackdowns. There was the crackdown of the tech sector, which began in late 2020, on the crypto industry in late 2021, and a crackdown on the property industry that we mentioned earlier. This unpredictability has spooked foreign investors, who know that they won't be protected by the Chinese legal system if things go wrong. So, as a result, they've been selling off Chinese assets at record rates. Chinese shares listed in Hong Kong and New York have lost nearly $2 trillion in value, and Chinese property firms' international bond sales are down 98% year on year. Across the board then, foreign investors are selling off their Chinese assets, reversing a 5-year trend. And as you can imagine, this hasn't been good news for the Chinese economy either. So those are the 3 reasons that China's economy is shrinking, which poses the question, what are the CCP going to do about it? Well, at the moment, the CCP looks oddly impotent. They can't really drop the zero COVID strategy, both because it wouldn't look good politically and because their vaccination rollout has fallen short. While 88% of all Chinese people are vaccinated, just 60% of over 80s in China have received even 1 jab, and only about half of 60 to 80-year-olds have received their booster dose. When it comes to the property sector, the CCP have performed a partial U-turn, lowering mortgage credit requirements and scrapping the much-anticipated housing tax to try and buoy demand, but it still looks shaky. Ultimately then, it looks like the current cocktail of economic misfortune might prove too much, even for the mighty CCP. If you want to learn more from TLDR, then you should head over to Nebula. You've likely heard us talk about our streaming service Nebula before, but it's at its lowest price ever right now. So give me 1 minute to explain to you why you should care. And as always with TLDR, there's 3 reasons. Firstly, signing up to Nebula gets you a ton of additional TLDR content. We release some of our videos exclusively on Nebula, and those are full-length proper videos, as well as a super fun studio tour. We also release longer versions of some of our videos. In fact, we release a longer version of our show, The Daily Briefing, on Nebula every single day. That's a lot more TLDR for you every day. Secondly, everything on Nebula is ad-free. And that's not just TLDR either. That's all of your favorite creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, Polymatter, Legal, Half as Interesting, and tons of others. And it's all ad-free, so there's no mid-rolls, and I wouldn't even be talking to you right now. Thirdly, signing up and watching on Nebula really helps the channel. And here's the maths. TLDR viewers signing up to Nebula has significantly improved our ability to monetize our content, which has allowed us to begin employing more staff and investing in new technology to improve our content. You might not notice it quite yet, but you soon will, and signing up is super helpful to make that possible. So, you're convinced, right? Did I do it in a minute? Who knows, it's pre-recorded. But anyway, if you did want to sign up for Nebula, the cheapest way to do so is with the CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal. That way, if you sign up to CuriosityStream at the crazy low price of $11.59 a year, then you'll also get free access to Nebula as long as you're a paying member. That's right, 2 streaming services for less than $1 a month. And by the way, that crazy low price only lasts for this week. And it's worth saying that CuriosityStream is awesome. It contains absolutely boatloads of high-quality documentaries on all kinds of topics that I know that TLDR viewers are going to love. So if you want both services for $11.59 a year, this week only, then the link is down below. And if not, well, I can't say I haven't tried to convince you. Thanks for your support.